Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and step back, way back, to a time when the very act of bringing new life into the world was, well, a roll of the dice with truly terrifying odds. Imagine it, if you will, a world without sterile instruments, without pain relief beyond a swig of questionable brandy, and certainly without the comforting hum of a modern hospital. You're not just an observer tonight, you are there. You are a woman in the 18th century, standing on the precipice of motherhood. And let me tell you, your chances of surviving this ordeal are probably worse than my chances of understanding quantum physics before my morning coffee. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the first twinge, a subtle tightening, a whisper of what's to come. It's not the dramatic, movie-style gush of water, nor the sudden, undeniable contractions that modern media often portrays. No, for you, living in this age of rough-hewn reality, it begins with a slow, creeping awareness. Perhaps you're kneading dough in the kitchen, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the earthy smell of the hearth, when a dull ache settles low in your back. Or maybe you're mending a tear in your husband's breeches by the flickering candlelight, and a sensation, like a knot tightening and releasing, makes you pause. You've heard the stories. Of course, every woman in your village has the hushed whispers of triumphs and, more often, tragedies. You've seen the empty chairs, the graves marked too soon. This is not a medical event in a sterile environment. This is a natural, yet profoundly perilous, passage. The long-term effects of such interventions could be devastating. Women might suffer from chronic pain, incontinence, or fistulas. Horrific tears that created permanent openings between the vagina and the bladder or rectum. These conditions, often untreatable, led to a lifetime of suffering, isolation, and shame. The male doctor, having saved the mother's life, might not even be aware of the profound and lasting damage his interventions had caused. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That survival itself could come at such an unbearable cost. Your home, a small, perhaps two-room cottage, is where this monumental event will unfold. There are no gleaming white walls, no antiseptic smells. Instead, the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the lingering aroma of your last meal. The bed, a simple wooden frame with a straw mattress, will become your battleground. You might have a few precious linens, perhaps a quilt passed down from your grandmother. But comfort is a luxury, not a given. As the contractions grow stronger, you find yourself instinctively pacing, leaning against the rough-hewn walls, seeking any position that offers a fleeting moment of relief. Your breath catches in your throat, a small gasp escaping as a wave of pain washes over you, then recedes, leaving you momentarily breathless. You lie there, the echoes of the doctor's presence still lingering in the room, the metallic scent of his instruments, the lingering scent of his pomade, the memory of his cold, clinical touch. You are alive, and your baby is alive, but the experience has left an indelible mark. The emergence of the male doctor in childbirth was a pivotal moment in medical history, a step towards a more scientific understanding of the body. But for the women who lived through it, it was often a terrifying, dehumanizing, and deeply traumatic ordeal. It was a step into a new era, but one paved with immense suffering and uncertainty. The first person you call for is not a doctor, not a surgeon, but the local midwife. She is a woman of the community, often older, with hands gnarled by years of hard labor and countless births. Her knowledge is passed down through generations, a blend of practical experience, folklore, and sometimes outright superstition. She arrives, perhaps on foot, her worn leather bag containing a few simple tools, a piece of clean linen, a pair of sharp scissors, though their cleanliness is debatable, and perhaps a small vial of laudanum or a bottle of homemade cordial to ease the spirits. She doesn't wear gloves. The concept of germs is centuries away from being understood. Her hands, though calloused, are her primary instruments, feeling for the baby's position, assessing your progress. You trust her, for she is the only one who truly understands this journey. The immediate aftermath of childbirth is a period of fragile hope, a brief respite before the next, often invisible, threat emerges. For you, lying in your bed, cradling your newborn, the greatest fear isn't always the visible hemorrhage or the obvious trauma. No, it's the insidious, creeping dread of puerperal fever, or as it was chillingly known, childbed fever. This was the silent killer, a spectral presence that haunted every birthing room, striking down women who had seemingly survived the ordeal of labor, leaving families bewildered and devastated. The room is dimly lit, perhaps by a single tallow candle, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Your family members, if they are present, hover anxiously. Your husband perhaps paces outside, his worry a palpable presence. Your mother or an older sister might sit by your side, offering sips of water or wiping your brow with a damp cloth. But the real work, the raw, visceral struggle, is yours alone. You are encouraged to walk, to move, to find positions that gravity might assist. You might lean over a chair or even squat, a position considered more natural and effective in many cultures, but often overlooked in the more civilized practices of the time. The midwife encourages you, her voice a low, steady murmur, punctuated by instructions. Breathe, my dear, a push when the wave comes. You are strong. Imagine, if you will, the first few days. You are weak. Yes, but perhaps you feel a flicker of strength returning. You are able to sit up, to nurse your baby, to take a few sips of broth. Then, subtly at first, a chill runs through you. You dismiss it as a draft, or perhaps just the lingering effects of exhaustion. But the chill deepens, turning into uncontrollable shivers that rack your entire body. Your teeth begin to chatter, and no amount of blankets can bring warmth back to your bones. This is the ominous beginning, the first whisper of the fever taking hold. Hours bleed into one another. The initial discomfort has escalated into an agonizing crescendo. Each contraction is a mountain you must climb, a wave that threatens to engulf you. You grip the edges of the bed, your knuckles white, your teeth gritted, sweat beads on your forehead, trickling down your temples. Your hair, once neatly braided, now clings to your damp skin. The midwife checks your progress, her fingers probing, her expression a mixture of concentration and quiet concern. She might offer you a spoonful of a herbal concoction, perhaps made from raspberry leaves or ergot, believing it will strengthen your contractions. While raspberry leaf tea is still used today for its uterine toning properties, the use of ergot in the 18th century was a far more dangerous gamble, as its potent compounds could cause severe contractions, but also lead to hemorrhage or even death if not carefully dosed. This is a common historical fact. The widespread use of herbal remedies, some effective, some dangerous, was the norm. Soon, the chills give way to a burning heat. Your skin is flushed, hot to the touch. Your head throbs with a relentless ache, and your muscles feel heavy and sore, as if you've been beaten. Your mind, already weary, becomes clouded, drifting in and out of a semi-conscious state. You might hallucinate, seeing shadowy figures at the edges of your vision, or hearing distorted whispers. The world around you becomes a blurry, feverish dream, punctuated by moments of agonizing clarity where the pain and discomfort are overwhelming. The concept of pain management as we know it is non-existent. There are no epidurals, no gas and air. You are expected to endure, to bear the pain as a natural part of the process. Some women might be given a small amount of laudanum, an opium-based tincture, to dull the edges of the agony. But it's a double-edged sword. Too much, and you become drowsy, unable to push effectively. Too little, and the pain remains an overwhelming force. You might cry out, a primal sound torn from deep within you, but mostly, you focus, channeling every ounce of your strength into the task at hand. The midwife might offer words of encouragement, or even a stern reprimand if you falter, reminding you of the life that depends on your endurance. A common historical fact is that puerperal fever was a devastating epidemic in maternity wards and homes throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, responsible for a significant percentage of maternal deaths. It often struck within the first few days or weeks after childbirth, turning what should have been a period of recovery into a fight for life. Its cause remained a mystery for centuries, leading to various theories ranging from bad air miasma to divine punishment. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail of the time is the use of birthing chairs. While not universally adopted, these chairs, often with an open seat, allowed the woman to sit upright or in a semi-squatting position, theoretically leveraging gravity. However, their design and the lack of proper hygiene meant they could also be vectors for infection. Imagine the rough wood, the difficulty of cleaning, and the constant risk of contamination in an age where the very concept of microscopic pathogens was unknown. It's a stark reminder of the limited understanding of physiology and hygiene. Your family, observing your rapid decline, would be gripped by a helpless terror. They would try to cool your fever with damp cloths, offer you sips of water, or perhaps a strong, bitter herbal concoction. But nothing seems to work. The fever rages, relentless, consuming your strength with terrifying speed. Your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, your pulse a frantic flutter. The midwife, if she returns, would likely be just as baffled and powerless. She might recognize the symptoms, having seen them before, but she would have no effective treatment. As the hours stretch on, the midwife might begin to show signs of worry. Perhaps the baby isn't descending as expected, or the contractions are weakening. This is where the true horror of 18th century childbirth often began. Without the ability to perform a cesarean section safely, it was almost always fatal for the mother, or to induce labor effectively, or to use forceps with precision. Complications quickly escalated into life-threatening emergencies. If the baby was breech or too large or positioned incorrectly, the options were grim. The midwife might try manual manipulation, a painful and often fruitless endeavor. She might resort to desperate measures, praying for a miracle. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail is the practice of bloodletting or purging as a treatment for fevers, including puerperal fever. Doctors, believing that illness was caused by an imbalance of the body's humors, would often bleed patients, hoping to release the bad blood that was supposedly causing the fever. They might also administer strong laxatives or emetics to purge the body. Imagine already weakened by childbirth and ravaged by fever, having blood drained from your arm or being forced to vomit violently. These treatments, far from helping, often further debilitated the patient, accelerating their decline. It's like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it, isn't it? The academic debate still rages among historians about the exact prevalence of lying in hospitals versus home births in different regions. While home births were undoubtedly the norm for the vast majority of the population, particularly in rural areas, lying in hospitals, rudimentary as they were, did exist in larger cities. However, these institutions often had higher mortality rates due to the rampant spread of infection, making them places of last resort rather than safe havens. So, while you're likely giving birth at home, the very idea of a hospital for childbirth was a relatively new and often more dangerous concept. The academic debate still rages among historians about the exact mortality rates of puerperal fever in different regions and social classes. While it's clear that it was a major killer, pinpointing precise figures is difficult due to inconsistent record keeping and varying diagnostic criteria. However, estimates suggest that in some lying-in hospitals, mortality rates from puerperal fever could reach as high as 20 to 30%. A truly terrifying statistic that highlights the extreme danger women faced. The air in the room grows heavy, not just with the physical exertion, but with the unspoken fear. You can feel the exhaustion seeping into your bones, but there's no rest, no respite. You are pushing with every ounce of your being. The midwife's voice is now sharper, more urgent. She might call for hot water, for clean cloths, preparing for the moment of delivery. The tension in the room is palpable, a thick blanket of anxiety that settles over everyone present. You are acutely aware of the fragility of life, the thin veil separating existence from oblivion. Every breath is a struggle, every push a desperate plea for release. As the infection spreads, your abdomen might become distended and exquisitely tender. The pain is sharp, stabbing, and constant. You might develop a foul-smelling discharge, a clear sign of the internal decay taking hold. The bacteria, introduced during the birth process, are now multiplying unchecked, invading your uterus, your bloodstream, and ultimately, your vital organs. There is no understanding of antiseptics, no knowledge of how to prevent the spread of these microscopic invaders. The very hands that delivered your baby, or the instruments used, could have been the unwitting carriers of your demise. And then, a shift, a final monumental effort, a tearing, burning sensation. And then the first cry. It's not the robust, indignant wail you might imagine, but perhaps a weak, reedy sound, a testament to the struggle both you and your child have just endured. The midwife, with practiced hands, catches the baby, quickly clearing its airway. The relief that floods through you is immense, overwhelming. A wave of pure, unadulterated exhaustion mixed with an almost unbearable joy. You have done it. You have brought a new life into this harsh, unforgiving world. You are vaguely aware of your baby crying, a tiny, insistent sound that pierces through the fog of your illness. You want to reach for them, to comfort them, but your limbs feel like lead. The thought of leaving them, of not being there to nurture and protect this new life you've just brought into the world, is a torment more agonizing than any physical pain. This is the cruelest irony of childbed fever. It often strikes mothers, just as they are beginning their journey with their newborns, leaving infants motherless and vulnerable. But the journey isn't over. The placenta still needs to be delivered, a process that can be fraught with its own dangers, such as hemorrhage. The midwife carefully massages your abdomen, encouraging the expulsion of the afterbirth. Once it's out, she inspects it, a common practice to ensure no pieces are left behind, which could lead to severe infection. Then she turns her attention to you, checking for tears, though stitching them up effectively and antiseptically is a concept still far in the future. You are left to bleed, to heal naturally, relying on your body's own resilience. The despair in the room is palpable. Your family watches, their faces etched with grief and helplessness. They know deep down that there is little they can do. They might pray, light candles, or seek the advice of a local healer, but the outcome is often predetermined. You are slipping away, slowly but inexorably, into the darkness. The once vibrant life force within you is being extinguished, piece by agonizing piece. The baby, swaddled in what clean cloths are available, is placed beside you. You gaze at the tiny, wrinkled face, a miracle born of immense suffering. The future is uncertain for both of you. The infant mortality rate is shockingly high, and your own recovery is far from guaranteed. But for this fleeting moment, there is only the profound, exhausted peace of a life brought forth. You close your eyes, the sounds of the room fading, the pain a dull throb, replaced by the gentle rhythm of your own breathing and the soft, tentative breaths of your newborn. The journey of understanding puerperal fever is a story of medical heroism and tragedy. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that pioneering figures like Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician, began to unravel the mystery. He observed that women in his hospital's maternity ward attended by doctors and medical students had significantly higher rates of childbed fever than those attended by midwives. His groundbreaking and initially ridiculed insight was that the doctors were carrying cadaverous particles from the dissecting room to the birthing ward on their unwashed hands. When he instituted mandatory hand washing with chlorinated lime solution, the mortality rates plummeted. Joseph Lister later built on these ideas with his work on antiseptic surgery. But for you, in the 18th century, these life-saving discoveries are still decades, even a century, away. You've survived the most harrowing moments. But the battle isn't over. The reality of 18th century childbirth isn't just about the agonizing moment of delivery. It's a prolonged process that unfolds within the confines of your own home, a place where comfort and hygiene are distant luxuries. You lie there, utterly spent, on your simple straw mattress, likely the same bed where you sleep every night, where you eat, and where you've just wrestled with life and death. There's no separation of space, no dedicated birthing room. The scent of blood, sweat, and other bodily fluids mingles with the earthy smell of the hearth and the lingering aroma of your last meal, creating a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. You are a victim of ignorance, a casualty of a medical era that simply didn't possess the tools or the knowledge to combat such a pervasive threat. Your suffering is not unique. It is a shared tragedy for countless women across the land. a silent epidemic that claims lives without mercy or explanation. The thought of your baby, left without a mother, is a cold, sharp blade in your heart. You try to hold on, to fight, but your body is failing you. The dim light from a single candle or the faint glow of moonlight filtering through a small window is barely enough to discern the blurry shapes around you. There are no electric lights, no bright, white illumination to reveal every corner. This not only creates a gloomy ambiance, but also conceals countless potential dangers. Dust accumulates everywhere, from the cracks in the floorboards to the worn, old curtains. Clean water is a precious commodity, often drawn from a well or river, and the concept of boiling it for sterilization is largely unknown. You might have used water from a bucket placed by your bed, water that could have been used to wash feet or vegetables just hours before. The final moments are a blur. Perhaps you hear the frantic whispers of your family, the distant sound of a bell tolling, or the soft cries of your baby. The heat of the fever gives way to a chilling coldness, a profound stillness that settles over you. The battle is over. The silent killer has claimed another victim, leaving behind an empty space, a grieving family, and a newborn who will never know the warmth of their mother's embrace. It's a stark, brutal end to a journey that began with such hope and pain. The reality of 18th century childbirth, even after a seemingly successful delivery, was a constant dance with death. And puerperal fever was often the final, fatal partner. Imagine the coarse linen cloths, perhaps washed, but certainly not sterilized. They are used to line the bed, to wipe you down, to swaddle your baby. These cloths, though appearing clean to the naked eye, are teeming with invisible bacteria, ready to invade any open wound. You, with a body that has just undergone immense trauma, with potential tears in your delicate tissues, are an easy target for these tiny enemies. There are no sterile bandages, no antiseptics. Everything relies on sheer luck and your body's natural resilience. You have survived against staggering odds. Your body, though scarred and weary, has brought forth new life. But even as you begin to heal and the immediate terror of childbirth recedes, a new pervasive dread settles over your small home, the horrifying reality of infant mortality. For you, in the 18th century, the birth of a child is not a guarantee of life, but merely the first perilous step in a journey fraught with unseen dangers. You are now a mother, yes, but you are also a constant guardian against a myriad of threats that could snatch your precious newborn away at any moment. Privacy is a luxury you cannot afford. Your small home might be shared by an extended family, including young children. They might be sleeping in a corner of the room, or stirring awake at your groans. Your husband, mother, older siblings, or even close neighbors might be present, not just for support, but as witnesses to this profound event. There are no closed doors, no separate spaces for you to fully immerse yourself in the pain and privacy of the moment. Everything unfolds openly, in a cramped space where everyone shares a common existence. Imagine your baby, tiny and fragile, nestled beside you. You watch their chest rise and fall with each shallow breath, a constant vigil against the sudden stillness that has claimed so many other infants in your village. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, is also a carrier of unseen pathogens. Every cough from a family member, every speck of dust, every unwashed hand that touches your child represents a potential harbinger of illness. There are no vaccines, no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory. Your baby's immune system, still nascent and undeveloped, is their only defense against a world teeming with microscopic enemies. If the delivery is successful, the doctor might leave as abruptly as he arrived, satisfied with his work, perhaps leaving a few instructions for your recovery that are as vague as they are unhelpful. He might not return for follow-up visits, leaving your continued care to your family, or if you're lucky. The returning midwife. His role was often limited to the acute phase of delivery, not the prolonged, delicate process of postpartum recovery. The first few days are critical. Your baby might develop a cough, a slight wheeze that sends a jolt of panic through you. Is it just a common cold, or something far more sinister? Respiratory infections, like pneumonia or whooping cough, are rampant and often fatal for infants. You try to keep them warm, swaddling them tightly in layers of linen, but the cold drafts that seep through the cracks in your cottage walls are a constant battle. The air itself feels heavy with the potential for sickness, a constant reminder of the fragility of your child's life. Beside you, the midwife remains vigilant. She might have stayed overnight, or she might shuttle back and forth between your home and hers. She is not just a physical assistant, but also a source of emotional solace. She tells stories, hums lullabies, or simply maintains a quiet presence, allowing you to focus. However, her knowledge, though accumulated over many years, is still severely limited. She doesn't understand anatomy scientifically, nor does she grasp the causes of infection. She follows what she has been taught, what has been passed down through generations by word of mouth. A common historical fact is that infant mortality rates in the 18th century were shockingly high, with estimates suggesting that between 20–50% of children did not survive to their first birthday, and many more died before reaching adulthood. This was not an anomaly, but a tragic norm, deeply shaping family structures and societal attitudes towards childhood. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That for every 2 babies born, one might not see their first spring. A common historical fact is that the vast majority of births in the 18th century took place at home, attended by a midwife. Hospitals, if they existed, were often for the destitute or for cases that had become exceptionally difficult, and were typically places of last resort rather than safe havens. This meant that the quality of care depended entirely on the midwife's skill and experience, as well as the hygiene conditions of each individual household. Then there's the issue of feeding. If you're fortunate, your milk comes in abundantly, providing your baby with the nourishment and antibodies they need. But what if it doesn't? What if your body, weakened by childbirth or illness, struggles to produce enough milk? There are no formula options, no readily available alternatives that are safe and nutritious. Wealthier families might employ a wet nurse, another woman who has recently given birth and can breastfeed your child. But for you, a common villager, this is an expensive luxury, often out of reach. You might resort to feeding your baby gruel or diluted animal milk, often contaminated and lacking essential nutrients. This practice, known as dry nursing, frequently led to malnutrition, digestive issues, and a host of other illnesses that could quickly prove fatal for a fragile infant. You know, trying to feed a baby with cow's milk back then was probably about as effective as trying to teach a cat to fetch. You might muse, a grim smile on your face. Consider the tools the midwife carries, perhaps a small knife for the umbilical cord, a pair of shears, or some rough thread. These instruments, though rinsed with water, are far from sterile. They might have been used for numerous other births, carrying pathogens from one person to the next. You might see the midwife dip her hands into a basin of cool water, or wipe down her instruments with a cloth that has seen better days. Well, at least she's not using the floor rag to cut the cord. Right, you might think, a wry smile touching your lips. Digestive ailments are another silent killer. Your baby might develop diarrhea, a relentless purging that rapidly dehydrates their tiny body. Without understanding the importance of rehydration and electrolytes, and with contaminated water sources being the norm, such conditions quickly spiral out of control. You watch helplessly as your baby grows weaker, their cries becoming fainter, their skin losing its elasticity. The midwife, if she visits, might suggest a few herbal remedies, but often they are powerless against the relentless grip of dehydration. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail of the time is that many midwives also employed charms, folk rituals, or lucky objects to aid in childbirth. This could include placing a knife under the bed to cut the pain, or hanging a bell to ward off evil spirits. These practices, while medically harmless, illustrate the deep reliance on belief and the helplessness in the face of what they couldn't scientifically explain. You might see the midwife mumbling a chant or placing an object under your pillow, believing it will ensure a smooth delivery. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail is the widespread belief in overlaying as a cause of infant death. This was the idea that a parent, sleeping in the same bed as their infant, might accidentally roll over and suffocate the child. While accidental suffocation certainly occurred, the concept of overlaying often served as a convenient explanation for sudden infant deaths that were, in reality, caused by undiagnosed infections, malnutrition, or congenital defects. It allowed grieving parents to attribute the tragedy to an accident rather than an unknown illness. providing a small measure of psychological comfort in an era of profound medical ignorance. It's like blaming a ghost when your bread goes stale, sometimes. The simplest explanation is just a convenient cover-up for something you don't understand. Historians still debate whether home birth was truly safer than rudimentary hospitals at the time. Some argue that the familiar environment and personalized care of a midwife might have reduced stress and, consequently, complications. However, others point out that the lack of basic hygiene and medical knowledge made both options inherently high risk. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, depending on the specific circumstances and living conditions of each individual. The academic debate still rages among historians about the primary drivers of infant mortality in different regions. Was it primarily infectious diseases, malnutrition, birth trauma, or a combination of all these factors? While it's clear that all played a role, the relative importance of each varied depending on climate, social conditions, and economic status, making a definitive universal answer elusive. You lie there, feeling the changes within your body. The intense pain has subsided, but exhaustion and soreness linger. You try to move, but every movement is a challenge. The midwife might have prepared a poultice of herbs to reduce swelling or soothe the pain. You feel a warmth spreading from your perineum, perhaps from a warm compress or some kind of oil. The scent of herbs wafts through the air, mixing with the smells of blood and sweat. Congenital conditions, though less understood, also contributed to the high mortality rates. A baby born with a heart defect, a severe malformation, or a genetic disorder would have little to no chance of survival. There were no diagnostic tools, no surgical interventions, no specialized care. Such infants were often seen as frail or unlucky. Their early deaths attributed to fate or divine will rather than biological realities. You might simply watch your baby struggle. Their breathing labored, their skin a bluish tint, knowing there is nothing you can do but offer comfort until their tiny flame flickers out. The baby lies beside you, breathing steadily. You reach out to touch the soft skin of your child, feeling the tiny warmth. This is a sacred moment, but also one filled with apprehension. You know that your child's journey has only just begun, and the world beyond this door is fraught with danger. Will they survive the first few days? Will you have enough milk to nourish them? Will there be enough food for your entire family to subsist? These questions swirl in your mind, relentlessly. The lack of basic hygiene extends beyond your home. If you live in a village, the water supply might be contaminated by human or animal waste. The streets are often unpaved, muddy, and filled with refuse. Flies carrying disease are ubiquitous. Your baby, with their delicate skin and developing immune system, is constantly exposed to these environmental hazards. Even a simple scratch or rash could become infected, leading to a more serious illness. Remember the general unsanitary conditions we talked about in Chapter 2. Now imagine your tiny, vulnerable baby navigating that world. It's like trying to keep a newborn clean in a mud wrestling arena. The midwife might prepare you a herbal tea to help you regain your strength. You sip it slowly, tasting the bitterness of the herbs on your tongue. She speaks to you in a gentle tone, recounting other births she has witnessed, stories of life and death, of joy and sorrow. She is a repository of folk knowledge, a storyteller of what has transpired in the community. The emotional toll of infant mortality is immense. You, as a mother, live with a constant, gnawing fear. Every cough, every sneeze, every moment of silence from your baby sends a jolt of terror through your heart. You learn not to become too attached too quickly. A heartbreaking coping mechanism born of necessity. You might see mothers in your village who have buried multiple children, their faces etched with a profound, unspoken grief. The joy of a new birth is always tempered by the knowledge that it could be fleeting. You try to drift off to sleep, but your mind continues to race. You recall the stories of women who didn't make it, of children who left too soon. You know you are fortunate, but this fortune comes with a heavy burden. You must be strong, not just for yourself, but for the tiny life you've just brought forth. Life in the 18th century is a constant struggle, and childbirth is just one of many trials. The rituals surrounding infant death are as common as those for birth. If a baby dies, the family mourns, but often with a sense of fatalism. The body might be quickly prepared for burial, perhaps wrapped in a simple shroud, and laid to rest in the local churchyard. often in an unmarked grave or one shared with other infants. There are no elaborate funerals, no extensive mourning periods, simply because such tragedies are so common. Life must go on, even in the face of such profound loss. Your home, though small and lacking, is the safest place you can find in this moment. It is where you can rest, where you can recover, and where you can begin your journey into motherhood in a world filled with uncertainties. You hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the door, the crackle of burning wood in the fireplace. These familiar sounds offer a small comfort, a quiet peace in your soul. You might find yourself talking to your baby constantly, whispering prayers, telling them stories, trying to imbue every moment with love and connection, knowing that each day is a precious gift. You cherish every smile, every gurgle, every tiny grasp of their hand. These small moments of joy are your anchors in a sea of uncertainty, your defiance against the ever-present threat of loss. You close your eyes, trying to fall asleep. You dream of a better future, a future where your child won't have to endure what you've just endured. You dream of a world where childbirth is no longer a death sentence, where life is welcomed with joy and hope rather than with fear and anxiety. But that is just a dream. The reality remains harsh and unforgiving. The community offers its own forms of support. Women who have experienced loss will offer quiet comfort, a shared glance of understanding. They might bring you food, help with chores, or simply sit with you in silence. It's a collective grief, a shared burden that binds the women of the village together. They understand, perhaps better than anyone, the immense courage it takes to bring a child into this world, and the profound sorrow of watching them leave it too soon. As the first fragile hours of your child's life unfold, your attention naturally turns to the figure who has been your anchor through this storm, the midwife. She is more than just a birth attendant. She is a pillar of the community, a repository of ancient wisdom, and, in many ways, your best hope. You watch her now, her movements perhaps a little slower, a little more deliberate after the long night. But her eyes remain sharp, observing both you and your newborn with an almost paternal intensity. Her hands. Remember those calloused, experienced hands. They are now gently tending to your baby, swaddling them tighter, checking their breathing, murmuring soft words that are as much for your reassurance as for the tiny new life. As the weeks turn into months and your baby grows stronger, the immediate fear might begin to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. Each milestone, the first smile, the first laugh, the first tooth, is a triumph, a small victory against the overwhelming odds. You learn to live with the ever-present shadow of mortality, but you also learn to cherish the fragile, a precious life that has been entrusted to your care. The reality of 18th century infant mortality is a brutal testament to the harshness of the era, but also to the enduring strength of maternal love in the face of unimaginable adversity. Her knowledge isn't derived from textbooks or formal medical schools because such institutions for women are practically non-existent. Instead, it's a living, breathing tradition passed down from her own mother, her grandmother, or perhaps an older, revered midwife in the village. She learned by doing, by observing, by feeling the subtle shifts in a woman's body, by listening to the cries of mothers and the first gasps of newborns. This experiential learning, while lacking scientific rigor, made her acutely attuned to the rhythms of birth. She knows the signs of trouble, even if she doesn't understand the underlying physiological causes. She recognizes the subtle shades of a woman's skin that might indicate a fever, or the faintness of a baby's cry that signals distress. You have navigated the treacherous waters of childbirth and the immediate, terrifying threat of infant mortality. But the journey of motherhood in the 18th century is far from over. Now you face the often overlooked, yet equally perilous phase of postpartum recovery, a period known as lying in. For weeks, sometimes even months. Your body is a landscape of healing and vulnerability, a canvas upon which the brutal realities of the era continue to paint their grim picture, and you are not simply recovering. You are walking a tightrope between fragile health and a cascade of potential complications. Her bag, that worn leather satchel, might seem rudimentary by today's standards, but to her it contains everything she needs. Perhaps a few herbal remedies she's gathered from the fields, a calming chamomile for your nerves, A potent dose of ergot to encourage the placenta, though, as we discussed, that one's a real wild card. She might have a small, well-worn wooden bowl for mixing concoctions, and a piece of clean, though not sterile, linen that she carefully guards. There might be a few sharp objects, a pair of scissors for the umbilical cord, perhaps a small, curved knife for an emergency, though she prays she never has to use it. These tools are her livelihood, her connection to generations of women who have performed the same sacred, perilous work. Imagine your body, still aching and swollen, trying to regain its strength. The fierce contractions that brought your baby into the world have ceased, but your uterus, a muscular organ that has just expanded to an incredible size, now begins the slow, painful process of contracting back to its pre-pregnancy state. This process, known as involution, is accompanied by after pains, sharp, cramping sensations that can be surprisingly intense, especially if you are breastfeeding. You might feel a constant dull ache in your lower abdomen, a reminder of the monumental effort your body has just endured. There's no modern pain relief beyond a few sips of weak tea or perhaps a small dose of laudanum, which can leave you drowsy and unable to fully care for your newborn. She doesn't just deliver babies, she delivers comfort, advice, and a sense of continuity. She's seen it all, the easy births where the baby practically slides out, the agonizing ones that stretch for days, the heartbreaking ones that end in silence. She knows the local gossip, the family histories, the unspoken tensions that might affect a laboring woman. She is, in essence, a community therapist, a spiritual guide, and a practical nurse, all rolled into one. It's a job that demands incredible resilience, empathy, and a strong stomach. You know, you might think, watching her, she probably has more stories than a wandering bard, and most of them probably end with someone needing a very strong drink. Bleeding, or lochia, is a continuous presence for several weeks. This discharge, a mix of blood, mucus, and uterine tissue, is a natural part of the healing process. However, without proper understanding of hygiene, it's a constant source of potential infection. You might use crude, absorbent cloths, which are then washed and reused, never truly sterilized. The smell, though you try to ignore it, is ever present. Any increase in bleeding or a change in its color or odor sends a jolt of fear through you, knowing it could signal a dangerous hemorrhage or infection. Remember the terror of puerperal fever from Chapter 6? The risk of its resurgence, or a new infection taking hold, is a constant, lurking shadow. A common historical fact about midwives in the 18th century is their central role in childbirth for all social classes, especially in rural areas. While wealthier families in urban centers might occasionally employ a male physician, the vast majority of women, from the humblest peasant to the landed gentry, relied on the local midwife. She was accessible, affordable, and, crucially, a woman, which was a significant factor in a society where modesty was paramount and male involvement in such intimate matters was often considered inappropriate or even scandalous. A common historical fact is that the lying-in period was a recognized and often formalized time of rest and recovery for women after childbirth, lasting anywhere from a few weeks to over a month, depending on social class and regional customs. During this time, women were typically confined to their beds or homes, shielded from strenuous activity and often from visitors, in an attempt to promote healing and prevent illness. While the intention was good, the lack of medical understanding often meant this confinement inadvertently increased risks, such as blood clots. Her methods are a blend of practical observation and deeply ingrained folk beliefs. She might encourage you to walk around, to squat, to try different positions to aid the baby's descent. She understands the power of gravity, even if she can't articulate the physics behind it. She might also employ various rituals or superstitions, like placing a key under your pillow to unlock the birth canal, or scattering salt around the bed to ward off evil spirits. These aren't necessarily harmful, but they highlight the era's reliance on spiritual and traditional practices to explain and influence the unpredictable nature of birth. It's a world where the line between medicine and magic is often blurred, and a good outcome is as much attributed to divine favor as to skillful hands. Then there's the challenge of breastfeeding. If you are able to nurse, your breasts become engorged, tender, and sometimes painfully full. Cracked nipples, Mastitis, a painful breast infection, and insufficient milk supply are common issues. Without lactation consultants or modern pumps, you rely on instinct and the advice of older women. If your baby struggles to latch or if your milk doesn't come in, the despair can be overwhelming. Knowing that your baby's very survival depends on your ability to nourish them, you might try various folk remedies to stimulate milk production, from drinking specific herbal teas to applying warm compresses, all with varying degrees of success. Honestly, if I had a shilling for every time someone told me to drink more nettle tea for my milk, I'd be richer than the king. You might grumble to yourself, half joking. An interesting, perhaps obscure, detail is the practice of midwife's marks or tokens. Some midwives would give a small, unique item to the newborn or the mother after a successful birth, serving as a kind of receipt or a charm for good fortune. This might be a specially knotted piece of thread, a small carved wooden figure, or even a particular type of coin. These tokens, often imbued with personal significance, were a way for the midwife to leave her signature on the event, a small piece of her presence in the new family's life. Imagine, centuries later, someone finding one of these tiny, forgotten talismans and wondering about the hands that crafted it and the life it ushered in. The academic debate still rages among historians about the true extent of medical knowledge possessed by traditional midwives. Some scholars argue that while they lacked formal anatomical understanding, their extensive practical experience and observational skills made them remarkably effective within the limitations of their era. Others contend that their reliance on superstition and lack of sterile practices often led to preventable complications, even if they were the best available option at the time. It's a complex picture and reflecting the gradual shift from empirical, folk-based medicine to a more scientific, evidence-based approach. She watches for signs of trouble with an intensity that can be unnerving. If the labor is prolonged, if the baby isn't moving, if you begin to bleed excessively, her calm demeanor might crack, revealing the deep worry beneath. Her options are severely limited. She can't perform a cesarean section. That's a death sentence for the mother in this era. She doesn't have access to blood transfusions or antibiotics. Her primary tools for intervention are her hands, her experience, and perhaps a desperate prayer. She might try manual maneuvers to reposition the baby, a painful and often risky procedure for both mother and child. You might hear her muttering to herself, a low, worried hum that sends shivers down your spine. Oh dear, you might think. That's the sound of someone realizing they're playing a game of medical roulette with very high stakes. The academic debate still rages among historians about the psychological impact of the postpartum period on 18th century women. Did the constant fear of illness, the physical discomfort, and the immense pressure to produce a healthy heir contribute to what we now recognize as postpartum depression? While direct evidence is scarce, the sheer burden of the era suggests that mental health struggles during this vulnerable time were likely far more prevalent than historical records indicate. Often dismissed as melancholy or nervousness, her reputation in the community is everything. A successful birth enhances her standing, bringing more clients and respect. A tragic outcome, however, can tarnish her name, leading to suspicion or even accusations of incompetence. This pressure, though unspoken, is immense. She carries the weight of every life she helps bring into the world, and every life that slips away despite her best efforts. You see it in the lines etched around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands when a birth is particularly difficult. Beyond the immediate physical recovery, there are other, less visible dangers. Deep vein thrombosis, or blood clots, were a silent killer. Confined to bed for weeks, with limited movement, your blood could pool in your legs, forming clots that could then travel to your lungs, causing a fatal pulmonary embolism. There was no understanding of this risk, no preventative measures like early ambulation or blood thinners. A sudden sharp pain in your chest, a difficulty breathing, and then a rapid decline. It was often misdiagnosed as another fever or a sudden stroke, leaving doctors and families bewildered by the sudden, unexpected death of a seemingly recovering mother. She also plays a crucial role in the postpartum period, often staying with you for a few days after the birth, or visiting frequently. She helps you with breastfeeding, offering advice on latch and milk supply, often based on generations of trial and error. She checks your healing, looking for signs of infection in your perineum or abdomen, though her understanding of what causes these infections is, Of course, limited. She might prepare nourishing broths or herbal teas to aid your recovery, believing that certain plants have restorative powers. This holistic approach, caring for both mother and child, was a hallmark of traditional midwifery. Your diet during this period is often limited, based on traditional beliefs rather than nutritional science. You might be given bland gruels, weak broths, and restricted from certain foods thought to be cold or heating. While some traditional diets might have provided essential nutrients, others could lead to deficiencies, further hindering your recovery and impacting your milk supply. You crave fresh fruit, perhaps a piece of meat, but you adhere to the prescribed diet, believing it is for your own good. Her social standing, while respected, is often ambiguous. Midwives were essential, yet they occupied a space that was neither fully within the medical establishment nor entirely outside it. They were often women of lower or middling social status, yet they possessed a unique power and intimacy with the lives of their community. They were privy to secrets, to moments of extreme vulnerability, and their discretion was as valued as their skill. They navigated a delicate balance, serving all but belonging to no single class. The demands of daily life do not cease simply because you have given birth. While you are supposed to be resting, the reality for most women is that chores still need to be done. The fire needs tending, meals need preparing, and other children, if you have them, still need care. Your husband might help, but his primary responsibilities lie outside the home. You push yourself, perhaps too soon, risking further injury or delaying your full recovery. The pressure to resume your duties, to be a productive member of the household, is immense, even when your body screams for rest. You recall a story your grandmother told you about a midwife who could tell the sex of a baby just by feeling the mother's belly. While this was likely more folklore than fact, it speaks to the almost mystical aura that surrounded these women. They were seen as having a special connection to the mysteries of life, a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. This perception, while perhaps not scientifically accurate, provided immense comfort and reassurance to women facing the unknown. It's a little like believing your old, battered Lucky Charm will help you win the lottery. You know it's probably not true, but it doesn't hurt to try, right? The emotional landscape of postpartum is also complex. The euphoria of survival is often quickly replaced by overwhelming fatigue, anxiety about your baby's health, and the sheer relentless demands of round-the-clock infant care. Sleep deprivation is a constant companion, blurring the line between day and night. You might feel isolated, even with family around, as no one truly understands the profound physical and emotional changes you are experiencing. The world outside your small cottage continues its rhythm, largely oblivious to the private struggle unfolding within its walls. The midwife's role also extended to advising on contraception, though the methods available were rudimentary and often ineffective. She might suggest certain herbs or practices like prolonged breastfeeding, which was known to naturally space births. This aspect of her work, while less discussed, was vital in helping families manage their size in an era of high child mortality and limited resources. She was, in many ways, a family planner before the term even existed. You might find yourself longing for the simple comforts you once took for granted: a full night's sleep, a moment of quiet solitude, the ability to move without pain. These small desires become monumental in their unattainability. Every ache, every twinge, every sleepless night is a stark reminder of the price you have paid for new life. The postpartum period in the 18th century was not a gentle transition into motherhood, but a prolonged test of endurance, both physical and mental, a final gauntlet to run after the trials of childbirth. You are a survivor, yes, but the scars of this journey, both visible and invisible, will forever be a part of you. As the days turn into a week, the midwife's visits become less frequent. She ensures you are recovering, that the baby is feeding, and that you have a basic understanding of infant care. Her departure marks a transition from the intense, focused period of birth and immediate postpartum care to the ongoing, daily realities of motherhood. You are now truly on your own, armed with her advice, your instincts, and the enduring hope that you and your child will thrive. Her presence, though gone, lingers in the quiet confidence she has instilled in you, and the knowledge that you have faced the ultimate challenge and emerged, albeit scarred, victorious. You have endured the physical gauntlet of childbirth and the precarious journey of postpartum recovery. Your body is slowly, painstakingly knitting itself back together. But as your physical scars begin to fade, you are acutely aware of another, perhaps deeper, set of burdens, the immense psychological and societal pressures that weigh heavily on you. The 18th century mother, this isn't just about surviving. It's about navigating a world where your worth, your identity, and your very future are inextricably linked to your ability to bear and raise children, often in the face of overwhelming odds. The midwife has left, her reassuring presence now a fading memory, and you are left with the profound reality of your new role. But even as you cradle your newborn, a new kind of anxiety begins to creep in. For all the relief of a successful delivery. The 18th century was a minefield of complications, where a seemingly minor issue could quickly escalate into a life-threatening crisis. You are now acutely aware that the battle for survival didn't end with the baby's first cry. It merely shifted its focus. Imagine the constant, unspoken pressure to produce an heir, especially if you are married into a family with land or status. Every pregnancy is not just a personal event, but a public expectation. Your value as a wife, as a woman, is often measured by the number of healthy children you bring forth. If you suffer miscarriages, stillbirths, or if your children do not survive infancy, the disappointment, both from within your family and from the wider community, can be crushing. You might feel a profound sense of failure, a deep shame that gnaws at your self-worth, even though the causes are often beyond your control. There's no support group, no understanding that these losses are not your fault. You simply bear the weight of it, often in silence. Imagine a scenario where, despite the midwife's best efforts, the placenta, that vital organ that nourished your child for 9 months, refuses to detach completely. You feel a persistent, dull ache, a sensation that something isn't quite right. The midwife, before she left, might have tried gentle traction or massage. But if a piece of the placenta remains, it becomes a ticking time bomb. This is known as a retained placenta, and in your era, it's a terrifying prospect. Without modern medical intervention, the risk of severe hemorrhage or infection skyrockets. You might feel a gush of blood, warm and alarming, soaking through your makeshift linens. Your vision might blur, your head spin, as your body struggles to cope with the loss of vital fluid. There's no blood bank, no emergency transfusion. Your lifeblood is simply draining away, and all you can do is lie there, feeling weaker with every passing moment. The grief of infant loss is a pervasive, yet often unacknowledged, shadow in your life. Remember the terrifying infant mortality rates we discussed in Chapter 7. You have likely witnessed it firsthand, either in your own home or among your neighbors. Each tiny coffin, each silent burial, chips away at your spirit. You learn to guard your heart, perhaps not allowing yourself to become too attached too quickly, a heartbreaking coping mechanism born of necessity. But even so, the bond with your child is primal, and the loss is devastating. You might find yourself weeping in secret, clutching a tiny swaddling cloth, or visiting a small, unmarked grave in the churchyard, alone with your sorrow. There's no formal counseling, no recognition of the profound trauma you are experiencing. You are expected to simply get on with it, to recover and try again. They say time heals all wounds. You might whisper to yourself. But I swear some of these wounds just keep bleeding, invisible to everyone else. Or consider the possibility of a hemorrhage, even if the placenta has been delivered. Perhaps your uterus, exhausted from the monumental effort of childbirth, simply fails to contract properly, leaving blood vessels open and bleeding freely. You feel a chilling dampness beneath you, a growing weakness in your limbs. The room, which once seemed merely dim, now feels like it's spinning. Your breath comes in shallow gasps. Your husband, if he's near, might notice the alarming pallor of your skin, the frantic beat of your pulse. He might try to call the midwife back, but precious minutes, even hours, could be lost. This is where the sheer lack of immediate, effective medical response truly highlights the brutal reality of the time. There's no IV drip to replenish your fluids, no medication to stimulate uterine contractions. You are left to the mercy of your own body. And often, it simply cannot recover from such a profound shock. A common historical fact is that while infant mortality was tragically common, the emotional impact on parents was profound. despite popular misconceptions that parents in this era were emotionally detached from their children due to the high death rates. Diaries, letters, and personal accounts from the period revealed deep love, intense grief, and elaborate mourning rituals for deceased children. Demonstrating that parental bonds were as strong then as they are today, a common historical fact is that postpartum hemorrhage was one of the leading causes of maternal mortality in the 18th century. Without understanding the mechanisms of uterine contraction or having access to drugs like oxytocin, midwives and physicians alike were largely helpless against severe bleeding. It was a race against time that mothers frequently lost, leaving behind newborns and grieving families. The physical demands of motherhood are relentless. You are recovering from childbirth, perhaps still bleeding, still in pain, yet you are immediately plunged into the round-the-clock demands of infant care. Breastfeeding, if successful, is constant. Changing soiled cloths, comforting a crying baby, trying to snatch moments of sleep, it's an exhausting cycle with no respite. And this is often on top of your regular household duties. There are meals to prepare, clothes to mend, water to fetch, gardens to tend. You are expected to be a mother, a wife, and a productive member of the household, all while your body is still healing and your sleep is constantly interrupted. The concept of maternity leave is centuries away. Then there are the infections. Remember those unsterilized tools, the unwashed hands, the general unsanitary conditions of your home. Every small tear in your perineum, every internal abrasion becomes an open door for bacteria. You might develop a fever, a slow burn that begins subtly but quickly escalates. Your body aches, your head throbs, and a general malaise settles over you. This isn't just a common cold. This is a systemic invasion. The area around your perineum might become swollen, red, and exquisitely painful. Pus might form. The smell, though you try to ignore it, is foul. There's no penicillin, no antibiotics to fight off the unseen enemy. Your body's immune system is your only defense, and often it's simply overwhelmed. Well, at least I don't have to worry about getting a paper cut right now. You might grimace, trying to find a dark humor in your predicament. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail is the societal expectation for women to resume sexual relations relatively quickly after childbirth, often within a few weeks, despite the physical pain and risk of infection. This was driven by the desire for more children, especially sons, and the lack of effective contraception. Imagine the pressure to perform marital duties when your body is still recovering, when you are exhausted and perhaps still in pain. This expectation further highlights the lack of understanding of female physiology and the prioritization of procreation over the woman's well-being. It's like being told to run a marathon right after you've just finished a triathlon. Your body is screaming no, but society is cheering you on. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail is the belief in childbed fever or puerperal fever, which was a terrifying and often fatal post-delivery infection. For centuries, its cause was a mystery. Doctors and midwives alike were baffled by why so many women, seemingly healthy after birth, would suddenly succumb to a raging fever, chills, and abdominal pain days later. It wasn't until the mid-19th century, with the work of Ignaz Semmelweis and Joseph Lister, that the link between unwashed hands, contaminated instruments, and the spread of infection was finally understood. But for you in the 18th century, it's a malevolent, invisible force, striking seemingly at random, leaving devastation in its wake. It's like a horror movie villain you can't see, but you know it's coming for you. The academic debate still rages among historians about the extent to which 18th century women had agency or control over their reproductive lives. While it's clear that societal pressures and medical limitations severely restricted their choices, some scholars argue that women found subtle ways to exert control, such as prolonged breastfeeding, which often acted as a natural contraceptive, or the use of folk remedies, even if their effectiveness was limited. Others contend that true reproductive autonomy was virtually non-existent for most women in this era. The academic debate still rages among historians about the psychological impact of such high maternal and infant mortality rates on 18th century women. How did they cope with the constant threat of death during childbirth? Did it lead to a sense of fatalism, or did it strengthen their resolve? While it's clear that women continued to have children, The emotional toll of losing multiple infants or facing one's own mortality with each pregnancy must have been immense, shaping their worldview in profound ways. Isolation can also be a significant burden. While you are surrounded by family and community, the unique experience of childbirth and early motherhood can be profoundly isolating. Your husband, if he is supportive, cannot truly understand the physical pain or the emotional intensity you're experiencing. Other women in the village might offer advice, but their own struggles and duties often prevent them from offering sustained, empathetic support. You might feel alone in your exhaustion, alone in your fears, and alone in your grief. The world outside your cottage continues its rhythm, largely oblivious to the private battles you are fighting within. What if the baby was too large, or positioned incorrectly? In your time, a breech birth where the baby presents feet or buttocks first was a terrifying complication. The midwife, with her limited knowledge and tools, would try to manually turn the baby, a procedure that was excruciating for you and incredibly risky for the child. If the baby's head became stuck, or if the labor simply stalled for too long, the options became truly desperate. There were no C-sections that would save both mother and child, if a baby could not be delivered naturally. The only recourse was often a craniotomy or embryotomy, procedures where the baby was dismembered in utero to save the mother's life. This was a horrific choice, a last resort, performed by a surgeon who might be called in for such extreme cases, often with crude instruments and no anesthesia. The screams, the desperation, the profound tragedy of such a moment are almost unimaginable. The fear of future pregnancies is a constant companion. You have just survived one ordeal, but you know that in this era, women are expected to bear many children. Each subsequent pregnancy brings with it the renewed risk of death, of complications, of losing another child. You might dread the thought of conceiving again, knowing the physical toll it takes, and the emotional pain that could follow. There are no reliable methods of birth control, so you are largely at the mercy of fate. This constant cycle of pregnancy, birth, and recovery, often compounded by loss, profoundly shapes a woman's life and worldview. You might hear whispers of women who burst or ruptured during labor. This refers to uterine rupture, a catastrophic event where the wall of the uterus tears, often due to prolonged or obstructed labor. The pain would be sudden, excruciating, and then a terrifying silence as contractions cease. Death for both mother and child was almost inevitable. It's a stark reminder of the immense physical strain placed on a woman's body during childbirth, without the benefit of modern medical understanding or intervention. Societal expectations regarding female behavior and roles also add to the pressure. You are expected to be pious, virtuous, and submissive. Your primary role is seen as that of a wife and mother, a nurturer of the family and a keeper of the home. Any deviation from these norms can lead to social ostracism or judgment. This rigid framework leaves little room for personal aspirations or individual expression, further confining women to a life defined by domesticity and childbearing. Even seemingly minor issues could become major complications. If you developed a severe fever, perhaps from an infection, you might become delirious, unable to care for your newborn. If you couldn't produce enough milk, or if your nipples became cracked and infected, your baby would face starvation. Wet nurses were an option for wealthier families, but for most, it meant trying to feed the baby with gruel or animal milk, which often led to malnutrition and illness in infants. Remember that feeling of overwhelming exhaustion? Now imagine trying to fight off a raging fever or a deep infection while still recovering from childbirth and trying to care for a fragile newborn. It's a Herculean task, one that many simply couldn't manage. The lack of education and opportunities for women further exacerbates their vulnerability. Most women in your position would be illiterate, with no access to formal learning or professions outside the home. This dependence on male relatives and the limited scope of their lives meant that their options were severely constrained, making it even harder to escape the cycle of repeated pregnancies and the associated risks. Your intellectual curiosity, if you possess it, remains largely unfulfilled, overshadowed by the immediate, pressing demands of survival and motherhood. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail is the widespread belief that postpartum women were particularly susceptible to catching a chill or being affected by bad air. This led to practices like keeping windows tightly shut, even in warm weather, and avoiding bathing or washing hair for weeks after birth. While intended to protect the mother, these practices actually increase the risk of infection and discomfort. Imagine the stifling, unventilated air in your small cottage, the lingering smells, and the inability to properly cleanse yourself, all in the name of preventing an unseen illness. It's a classic example of well-intentioned ignorance leading to counterproductive outcomes. You might find solace in your faith, turning to prayer for strength and comfort. The church, for many, was a central pillar of community life and a source of hope in a harsh world. You might pray for your child's health, for your own recovery, and for the strength to endure whatever challenges lie ahead. This spiritual connection often provided a vital emotional outlet and a sense of meaning in the face of suffering. The fear of complications wasn't just a personal dread, it was a communal anxiety. Every birth was watched with bated breath by the family and neighbors. The outcome of a birth could affect the entire community, a new life to celebrate, or a tragedy that cast a long shadow. The women of the village would gather, offering support, sharing their own experiences and perhaps their own fears. It was a shared vulnerability, a collective understanding of the immense risks involved. The physical changes to your body, too, can be a source of distress. Your figure, once perhaps slender, is now altered by pregnancy and childbirth. Your breasts might sag from nursing, your belly might remain distended. There's no emphasis on bouncing back or regaining your pre-pregnancy shape. Rather, these changes are simply accepted as the inevitable marks of motherhood. But for you, they are constant reminders of the physical toll, of a body that has been stretched and strained to its limits. You might find yourself constantly checking your baby, listening for every breath, every whimper. The fear of losing them, after all you've been through, is a constant, gnawing presence. Infant complications were just as prevalent, from birth trauma to infections, to congenital defects that couldn't be diagnosed or treated. The fragility of life in the 18th century was never more apparent than in the first few weeks after birth. The burden of knowing that your child's future is so precarious also weighs heavily. You are responsible for their survival, for feeding them, keeping them warm, protecting them from illness. Every sniffle, every rash, every moment of quiet from your baby sends a jolt of fear through your heart. You are constantly on guard, knowing that one wrong move, one moment of inattention, could have fatal consequences. This unrelenting vigilance is mentally exhausting, leaving you perpetually on edge. As you lie there, trying to rest, you might hear the sounds of life outside your small cottage, the distant bleating of sheep, the laughter of children playing, the familiar rhythm of daily chores. These sounds, usually comforting, now seem to mock the quiet struggle within. You are in a liminal space between the world you knew before and the uncertain future that stretches before you and your child. Every ache, every unusual sensation sends a jolt of fear through you. You are a survivor, yes. But the scars of this battle, both seen and unseen, will remain with you always. The horrifying reality of 18th century childbirth is not just in the moment of pain, but in the lingering shadow of what could go wrong, and the almost complete lack of recourse when it did. Despite all these burdens, there is also an incredible resilience that emerges. You witness it in yourself and in the women around you. The ability to endure, to grieve, and then to continue. To find joy in the smallest moments. To nurture new life against all odds. This strength, born of necessity and forged in hardship, is a testament to the human spirit. You learn to appreciate the fleeting moments of peace, the warmth of your baby's skin against yours, the simple act of a full meal. These small triumphs become monumental victories in a life defined by struggle. The days after your child's birth blur into a haze of exhaustion and vigilance. You are recovering, slowly, from the monumental effort, but the shadow of potential complications still looms. It's in this precarious landscape that a new controversial figure begins to emerge, challenging the age-old dominion of the midwife, the male doctor. You might have heard whispers of them. These men who dare to intrude upon the sacred, intimate space of childbirth. For most women in your village, they are a distant, almost mythical presence, confined to the bustling, often unsavory streets of the larger cities, but their influence, however remote, is slowly beginning to ripple outwards, bringing with it both a glimmer of hope and a profound sense of unease. The societal burden of childbirth in the 18th century was not just a medical crisis, but a profound social and psychological one. Women bore the brunt of this reality, often in silence, their lives shaped by the constant threat of death and the relentless demands of procreation. Yet, within this harsh framework, they found ways to endure, to love, and to carry on, leaving behind a legacy of strength and resilience that echoes through the centuries. Imagine the scene: you are still weak, perhaps battling a lingering fever, or simply overwhelmed by the demands of a newborn. The midwife, your trusted companion, has left. Suddenly, a new kind of intervention is proposed, perhaps by a worried husband who has heard tales of these man-midwives, or by a well-meaning but misguided relative. The idea of a man, a stranger, entering your private chamber, examining your most intimate parts, is deeply unsettling. Modesty is paramount in your society, and such an intrusion feels like a violation, a breach of all established norms. Your instincts recoil, but desperation, or the perceived inadequacy of traditional methods, might force a reconsideration. You close your eyes, the echoes of your own ordeal, and the collective suffering of countless women in the 18th century, still reverberating in your mind. But now, let's gently pull back from that harsh reality, and instead, look forward. Imagine a slow, almost imperceptible dawn breaking over the horizon of medical history. The darkness of ignorance and superstition doesn't vanish in an instant. Rather, it recedes gradually, replaced by the faint, then growing light of scientific understanding. You, the woman who endured so much, are now a witness to the slow, painstaking evolution of childbirth, a legacy born from the very suffering you experienced. These male doctors, often trained as surgeons, brought with them a different approach to childbirth. They were not steeped in the folk wisdom and gentle practices of the midwives. Instead, they approached birth as a mechanical problem, a challenge to be overcome with instruments and anatomical knowledge. They had studied in universities, dissected cadavers, and learned from male colleagues. Their understanding of the female body, while often crude by modern standards, was rooted in a more scientific, albeit still primitive, framework than that of the traditional midwife. They saw themselves as innovators, bringing enlightenment to a field they considered backward and superstitious. The first, most crucial step was the understanding of the unseen. For centuries, diseases, particularly the dreaded puerperal fever, were attributed to miasma, bad air, or imbalances of humors, or even divine displeasure. But slowly, painstakingly, the concept of microscopic organisms began to take root. Think of it: tiny, invisible creatures, too small to see, yet capable of wreaking such havoc. This was a revolutionary idea, one that would fundamentally transform medicine. You might scoff, thinking, germs? You mean those little invisible gremlins were the real culprits all along? And here I was blaming the moon. Their arrival in the birthing chamber was often dramatic. Unlike the quiet, reassuring presence of the midwife, the male doctor might arrive with a retinue of students or assistants, a clanking bag of metal instruments, and an air of detached professionalism. He might not speak to you in comforting tones, but in Latin medical terms you don't understand, discussing your body as if it were a mere specimen. The room, which once felt intimate and familiar, suddenly becomes a cold, clinical space, filled with attention that is entirely new. You might feel a profound sense of shame, of exposure, as this male stranger examines you with a gaze that feels less empathetic and more analytical. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a series of observations and experiments. In the mid-19th century, decades after your time, a Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis, working in a Vienna hospital, noticed a terrifying discrepancy. Women attended by medical students, who often came directly from dissecting cadavers, died of childbed fever at a much higher rate than those attended by midwives. His simple yet profound conclusion was that something was being carried from the dead to the living. His solution: mandatory hand washing with chlorinated lime solution. His colleagues ridiculed him, but the mortality rates in his ward plummeted. This was a common historical fact, a pivotal moment, though tragically, Semmelweis himself died in an asylum, his groundbreaking ideas largely unaccepted in his lifetime. A common historical fact is that the rise of the male accoucher, a term for a male obstetrician or midwife in the 18th century, was met with significant resistance, particularly from women and traditional midwives. They were often seen as intruding on a female domain, lacking the empathy and practical experience of women who had themselves given birth. This wasn't just about professional rivalry, it was a clash of worldviews, of traditional, community-based care versus a nascent, male-dominated medical profession seeking to assert its authority. Following Semmelweis, figures like Joseph Lister in Britain further developed the concept of antisepsis, using carbolic acid to sterilize surgical instruments and wounds. Imagine the difference this made. Instruments that were once vectors of death became tools of healing. Hands that once spread disease became agents of safety. The air in the birthing room, once thick with unseen threats, slowly became cleaner, safer. It was a slow, arduous battle against ingrained habits and professional pride. But the scientific method, however crude in its infancy, was beginning to win. The instruments they brought were both a source of fear and fascination. The most iconic of these were the forceps. Imagine a pair of large, curved metal tongs, designed to grasp the baby's head and pull it through the birth canal. In the hands of a skilled and careful practitioner, forceps could be life-saving, extracting a baby from a stalled or obstructed labor. But in the hands of an inexperienced or overly aggressive doctor, they could cause horrific damage to both mother and child. Severe lacerations, nerve damage, skull fractures, even death. You might hear the metallic clink as he lays them out, a sound that sends a shiver down your spine, knowing that these cold, unyielding objects are about to be used on your most vulnerable self. Well, at least they're not using a rusty butter knife, right? You might try to joke to yourself, though the humor feels thin and brittle. Then came the miracle of pain relief. For you, childbirth was an agony to be endured, a test of your very soul. But imagine a world where the screams could be silenced, where the relentless waves of pain could be dulled. The 19th century saw the introduction of ether and then chloroform as anesthetics. While initially controversial, particularly for women in childbirth, some argued it was unnatural or even immoral to alleviate the pain of labor. Citing biblical references, their use slowly gained acceptance. Queen Victoria herself famously used chloroform during the birth of her 8th child in 1853, lending royal approval to the practice. This was an interesting, perhaps obscure, detail. The Queen's chloroform played a significant role in making pain relief more acceptable. For the first time, women could experience childbirth without the all-consuming terror of excruciating pain. So, you're telling me I could have had a nap during all that? Seriously, you might exclaim, a hint of exasperation in your spectral voice. An interesting, perhaps obscure detail is the secrecy surrounding the invention and early use of obstetric forceps. The Chamberlain family, a dynasty of male accoucheurs in England, kept the design of their forceps a closely guarded family secret for over a century, passing it down from father to son. They would even blindfold the patient and work under a sheet to prevent anyone from seeing their secret weapon. This allowed them to maintain a monopoly on difficult births and charge exorbitant fees, highlighting the commercial and proprietary nature of early medical innovations. Imagine the sheer audacity, the theatricality of it all, in a time when life and death hung in such a delicate balance. As understanding grew, so did the role of the hospital. While your eras lying in hospitals were often death traps, the advent of germ theory and antiseptic practices slowly transformed them. They became places where cleanliness could be enforced, where instruments could be sterilized, and where women could receive more consistent, if still rudimentary, medical attention. Childbirth gradually began to shift from the home to the hospital, a slow but steady migration that would take well into the 20th century to complete. This centralization allowed for better training of medical professionals and the implementation of standardized procedures, however basic. The academic debate still rages among historians about whether the early involvement of male doctors in childbirth ultimately improved maternal and infant outcomes in the 18th century. Some argue that despite their crude methods and lack of understanding of germ theory, their anatomical knowledge and willingness to use instruments for difficult births occasionally saved lives that midwives could not. Others contend that their aggressive interventions often performed without anesthesia and in unsanitary conditions, frequently caused more harm than good, contributing to the very mortality rates they claimed to combat. It's a complex ethical and medical dilemma, viewed through the lens of a rapidly evolving, yet still deeply flawed, medical landscape. The academic debate still rages among historians about the exact timeline and regional variations of the shift from home births to hospital births. While the general trend is clear, the pace and reasons for this transition differed significantly across countries and even within different social classes of the same country. Some argue that it was primarily driven by medical advancements, while others emphasize social factors, such as the increasing professionalization of medicine and the changing perceptions of women's roles. The male doctor, unlike the midwife, often lacked the patience for a long, natural labor. He was trained to intervene, to manage the birth, to speed things along. This often meant administering powerful, unmeasured doses of ergot or resorting to forceps prematurely. You might feel a new kind of pain, sharp and mechanical, as he manipulates your body, pushing and pulling with a force that feels alien and terrifying. His focus is on the delivery of the baby, sometimes at the expense of your own well-being. The concept of a gentle, woman-centered birth was largely foreign to this emerging medical paradigm. The development of surgical techniques also progressed, albeit slowly. The cesarean section, once almost universally fatal for the mother, gradually became safer, with better understanding of anatomy, improved instruments, and, crucially, the ability to control bleeding and prevent infection. It transformed from a last-ditch effort to save a baby at the cost of the mother into a life-saving procedure for both. This meant that obstructed labors, which once led to horrific outcomes, could now be managed with a chance of survival for both mother and child. Their understanding of hygiene was no better than the midwives, and in some cases, arguably worse. A male doctor might arrive directly from dissecting a cadaver or performing surgery on a diseased patient without washing his hands or sterilizing his instruments. He would then proceed to examine a laboring woman, unknowingly transferring deadly bacteria directly into her open wounds. This unwitting transmission of pathogens was a major factor in the terrifying phenomenon of puerperal fever, which we touched upon earlier. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The very person brought in to save you might, through sheer ignorance, be the one to seal your fate. Beyond the immediate medical advancements, broader public health initiatives began to make a difference. Improved sanitation systems, cleaner water supplies, better nutrition, and a greater understanding of basic hygiene contributed to a general improvement in public health. These changes, though not directly related to childbirth, had a profound impact on maternal and infant mortality rates by reducing the overall burden of disease. Imagine a world where clean water wasn't a luxury, but a given. It sounds almost utopian from your 18th century perspective. The social implications of their involvement were profound. For centuries, childbirth had been a rite of passage, a communal event exclusively for women. The entry of men into this sacred space began to erode the authority and prestige of the midwife. As male doctors gained more influence, often backed by the burgeoning medical institutions and the aristocracy, traditional midwifery began to be marginalized, slowly losing its status as the primary form of birth attendance. This shift wasn't just about medical progress, it was about power, gender roles, and the professionalization of medicine. The role of women in this evolving landscape also changed. While traditional midwives initially lost ground to male doctors, the late 19th and 20th centuries saw the professionalization of nursing and, eventually, the re-emergence of trained, certified midwives who combined traditional wisdom with modern medical knowledge. Women also began to advocate for their own health and reproductive rights, demanding safer birthing practices and greater control over their bodies. This was a long, hard-fought battle, but it was a testament to the enduring strength and resilience that you, the 18th century mother, embodied. You might hear the doctor's voice, stern and authoritative, giving commands to your family members or to you. He might dismiss your cries of pain as mere hysterics, or your resistance as uncooperative. His bedside manner, if it could even be called that, was often brusque and impersonal. You are not a person to him, but a case, a medical challenge to be solved. This dehumanizing aspect of early modern medicine is a stark contrast to the empathetic, holistic approach of the traditional midwife. Looking back from the vantage point of today, the reality of 18th century childbirth seems almost unfathomable. The sheer pain, the constant threat of death, the helplessness in the face of infection, the profound grief of infant loss, it paints a picture of unimaginable hardship. Today, you walk into a clean, sterile hospital. You have access to pain relief, skilled medical professionals, and a wealth of knowledge that was simply unavailable to your ancestors. The odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. You are likely to survive, and your baby is likely to thrive. The fees charged by these male doctors were often prohibitive, making their services accessible only to the wealthy elite. For the vast majority of the population, the midwife remained the only option. This created a two-tiered system of care, where the poor continued to rely on traditional methods, while the rich, seeking the latest and often unproven medical innovations, turned to male practitioners. This disparity further widened the gap between social classes, even in the most fundamental aspects of life and death. The journey from your candlelit cottage to a modern birthing suite is a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. It's a story of how science, slowly but surely, began to peel back the layers of mystery and fear that surrounded the most fundamental act of human existence. The legacy of the 18th century mother, who faced such horrors with courage and resilience, is the foundation upon which all these advancements were built. Their suffering was not in vain. It spurred the very changes that have made childbirth a vastly safer, more humane experience today. You have come a long and challenging journey, haven't you? Take a deep breath, feeling the relief as we slowly drift away from the harsh images of the past. The whistling wind through the cracks in the door, the smell of smoke from the kitchen, and the painful groans are now just faint echoes, fading into the quiet night. Let your mind drift, like a small boat on a calm lake, carrying new understandings but no longer burdened by fear. The warmth of the soft blanket enveloping you, and the steady rhythm of your own breathing are all that remains. All worries, all scary images, are now far away, giving way to peace. Let sleep take you away into a world where everything is gentle and safe. As the doctor works, you might feel a profound sense of helplessness. Your body, once your own, is now subjected to the will and instruments of this stranger. The pain, already immense, is compounded by the fear of the unknown, the fear of what he might do, and the fear of the consequences. You clench your fists, bite your lip, and try to endure, praying that his intervention, however brutal, will lead to a positive outcome.